So this is we'll mention this again just before you leave, but it's the Austerity Binge, isn't it? It's called at the South Bank Centre, and performing all of your material from the TV show. Yeah, they let me programme four nights there, and there's a particularly good one, the 29th of May. I'm co-hosting a show called At Last, the 1981 show, where I've tried to put together the kind of bill of comics that you might have seen just before alternative comedy broke big. So we've got some people out of retirement like Alexei Sale, and Nigel Plain is doing Neil, the folk singer that he did in
Jimmy Cricket.
In the young one. No, not sort of different generation. And then things like The Greatest Show on Legs, that was the naked balloon dance, and Arthur Smith's doing it. And,
so these are people who were
they were kind of alternative comedians before they got branded alternative comedians.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, it's basically about. I mean, I just sort of thought it's so massive now, and sort of 30 years ago, you would never have thought that little mushrooming up of comedy would lead to sort of 25-date stadium tours. You know,
it is fascinating. I was looking at some stats about this. So, in terms of comedians now typically play big arenas, which used to be quite a rare thing.
Yeah.
Because it's quite an odd concept that a bloke on one microphone would stand on a stage in an arena.
Yeah, it is.
In 2004, 100,000 tickets were sold to see comedy in big arenas, and in 2009 it was more than 1 million.
Wow.
So it's a tenfold leap in 5 years.
Yeah.
I've seen you say in articles that is in a large part down to Michael McIntyre.
Yeah, I think Michael McIntyre's a sort of bridge between. There's still a residue in what he does of alternative comedy and of, like, you know, the sort of.
You admire him.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. It's a difficult thing to. It's not stuff I'd go and see, but I think to be able to be that popular without being awful is quite amazing. You know, because normally you have to sort of. And I think it's interesting to see it work on that stage. I suppose the thing is what happens next. You know, if he becomes a sort of light entertainment personality, what will happen? But I think it's been really helpful for stand up. I think it's sort of made people think they might go and see it. On the other hand, I'm slightly worried that it also establishes an idea that it all has to be like that, and that if you don't do that, it looks like you've made a mistake. And that's sort of the thrust of this series, is to make people think I've made a mistake.
Stuart, stay there. We're going to come back to you in a few minutes, if that's okay. So, Stuart Lee, your comedy vehicle, BBC Two tonight, 11:20. We should mention as well we'll come back and talk about this later, the Austerity Binge at the South Bank Centre, where people can see you. I wanted to come back to talk about when you were last here, and you were talking about what you said was.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but it was interesting. This thing about you being on stage and being in character. So there's Stuart Lee now in front of me. I guess you're not in character on the. This is you, right?
No, this is me. Yeah.
And then on stage,
this is me. It's like Mike Yarwood at the end when he used to do all his impressions and then go, and this is me. There's a slightly disappointing, strange, uneasy presence. That's what I am in real life.
No.
Yeah.
You see, you said on stage you're in character, and on stage you will sometimes attack. So you say, you quite admire Michael McIntyre, but on stage you'll attack him a little bit. Yeah. And like the Top Gear presenters, we played a bit of it at the start of the show today. That quite compelling bit where you talk about you don't know which of the three to despise the most. That's not really you talking.
Well, I don't like what the political view that I imagine informs Top Gear, right? But on the other hand, it's when we had a budget for the programme in the old days and we were trying to do a parody of Top Gear, we realised there was just no way we could afford to, because the production values on it are so amazing and the way it's all assembled. So it's a kind of weird thing where you sort of you can separate those things out in your head. You can admire something for what it's good at, whilst at the same time not really liking anything, and not really liking anything about it. And I suppose for on stage you choose a particular way to go. And one of the things I've found interesting as like comedy becomes more of a free-for-all, and it's not like 30 years ago where all the good comedy came from a broadly liberal perspective. It's much more varied now. I sort of think...
Not if you watch 10 o'clock live.
If you watch 10 o'clock live. Well, I don't know, is it? I mean, yeah... Now, that was sat oddly on Channel 4, didn't it? I was quite excited by that when it came on.
No, that had it had an exclusively liberal perspective.
Yeah, it did. But then maybe things will swing now that you've got now that you have a right-wing government. I mean, I kind of don't really know where we are. The other day I got asked if I'd do talk in a documentary being made by Katie Price about taste in comedy, and I thought, wow, we've got to a really strange position where that happens, So I don't know. I mean, I think you take a position of things that you agree with, but you also take a position for comic effect sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
Not always the same thing.
So, so there's an element of exaggeration, I guess.
Yeah.
What you do on stage. I noticed a quote of yours as well. We were talking earlier about how big comedy is now, and this is partly down to Michael McIntyre. You talk about comics being in the slipstream of Michael McIntyre. Yeah. And you're concerned now that ambitious young people will try to, I'm quoting you, I think, will try to develop an act to fit a demand rather than creating demand for a new kind of act.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is true of how stuff gets commissioned anyway, isn't it? I mean, I always use this example, like TV commissioners try and commission what they think people want, right? And so when those tend to be sort of copies of other existing hits or whatever. But, you know, the Mighty Boosh was a hit, and nobody would have thought that what people wanted to see was a pink sort of octopus with no body talking in a kind of exaggerated posh accent and flying around on a magic carpet. You know, if a member of the public was asked what they wanted to see, that wouldn't be one of the things. So I think all creative people, all commissioners, everyone you have to kind of try and do things that you don't know whether they're going to work, and see what happens.
Well, it's an important point here as well, which is the public, when asked what they want, will often get it wrong.
Yeah, or they say things that they already know, you know.
Well, there was a quote I saw in an article in a newspaper from, I think it was head of marketing for Burger King. Do you remember the fast food restaurants were under all that pressure to sell salads because of the obesity epidemic? Yeah. And Burger King commissioned this research and said to their customers, what do you want us to do? And all their customers said, they said to all the customers, do you think we should sell salads? And everyone said yes. Yeah. So they put salads on the menu and no one bought them. Yeah. And the marketing guy said, we asked our customers what they wanted, turned out they lied.
Yeah, they lied. Yeah, well, there's an interesting phenomenon that marketing people have noticed, which is there's a huge pork pie shaped hole in British consumer surveys, whereby a lot more pork pies are sold than anyone will admit to buying. Which means basically it's men doing what I do, which is while your wife's not looking, you chuck one in the shopping trolley and you hope you can get it home and eat it before anyone's found out. Right? So people aren't entirely straight about what they want. If you were to say to me, what do you think a balanced diet is? It wouldn't be a pork pie every day, but that's what I would eat. Left to my own devices, that's what I would eat.
I guess people sometimes, when asked what they want, give a slightly more aspirational answer.
Yeah, you do. People do with taste. I mean, there's a good example of when they, that brilliant film Airplane, right? When that was first tested, right, on audiences, it got really low scores, and then it went out and it did really well, because when people are asked for their opinion, no one wanted to admit to finding that kind of brilliantly stupid film hilariously amusing, but it doesn't fit in with people's idea of who they are.
Apparently as well, when you get, because they're putting these rooms in weird situations, that people do look at what each other are saying and reacting to, and so it's a bit like 12 Angry Men. They slightly influence each other.
Well, you know what a nightmare setup for stand-up for me is when you get to some sort of provincial town hall and they go, it's table seating, and there's groups of 12 people in rings, right, around a circular table, and always on that circular table there'll be someone who's kind of the alpha male of that group, and so all the laughter filters through that person, and normally the person who is the alpha male of a group hasn't got a terribly good sense of humour, because if they had, they wouldn't be the alpha male, they'd be the bloke making fun of it, you know what I mean? Yeah, of course. So actually that just kills a room for me, because the people I appeal to are not they're not the person in charge of a group, they're the other people, and and when the tables are people sat in circles, it all goes through that person. It's really interesting.
That person is for Top Gear.
Yeah, that's the Top Gear team. Yeah.
Charles Payton has emailed, and he says, I was turned away from the first recording of Stewart Lee's new TV show.
I always have him turned away, that man.
Because it was significantly overbooked. The bright-eyed young woman with the clipboard who told me that I hadn't quite made it offered me priority tickets to a recording of Mock the Week instead. As I trudged back to Dalston to catch my train, I'm sure the breathtaking inappropriateness of her suggestion and what Stewart might have thought about it must have brought a smile to my lips.
Well, you know what can you do? All that ticketing's handled by a company that's sort of farmed out by the BBC, and I mean, it's not as bad as it was 20 years ago when we first did television, me and Richard Herring. You would get whoever was in the building, and so we'd get about 100 people that wanted to see Fist of Fun, and they'd fill up the recording of our Comedy is the New Rock and Roll sketch show with people that had wanted to see Bruce Forsyth, and invariably it went quite badly in the room. So there's not, I'm sorry the man was turned away. If he wants to contact me via my website. You've got an agent. I'll endeavour to compensate him in some way, but don't take that as opening the floodgates where millions of people now pretend that they were turned away from things.
No, his name is Chris Payton.
Chris Payton, I'll remember that.
Andy from Yule, Stewart Lee's comedy vehicle is indeed excellent. Fist of Fun, is that coming back? I have the originals. Have you not bought the rights to them and you're bringing them out on DVD? Is that correct?
We did a series in the mid-90s called Fist of Fun, with Richard Herring and Peter Baynham, who ended up writing the Borat film and stuff like that. And it's sort of, I don't know what happened, it kind of fell into it was before the DVD release age, and so we never got released by the BBC, and we just found out last year that it was in the room where they put things before they destroy them, along with things like all the Beatles appearances and and the moon landings footage and stuff like that. So Richard Herring and a bloke called Chris Evans from Cardiff have sorted out buying it, and we're going to we've bought it off the BBC and we're going to release it ourselves, which means you have to stop downloading it illegally and buy it, because we've actually paid for it. But it will be out next year, I think, or even maybe at Christmas.
And so there'll be some extras on there, and you'll do some.
Well, Rich has got. Rich is like the sort of, he's like Bill Wyman was in the Stones, where he used to keep all the tickets. Rich Herring had like canisters of film. This is back in the days when stuff was shot on film. He's got canisters of film of stuff that wasn't put into the program, and he got all kinds of stuff and old scripts and things. So yeah, it should be. If you're like borderline mentally ill and obsessed with mid-90s comedy, it'll be absolute treasure trove.
Haven't you and Richard Herring talked about doing a one-off gig together again to launch?
Well, I think we will. Yeah, I think we'll do a one-off gig to launch this at some point. Yeah, the double acting, when we did it, we did it sort of a lot from about 94 to about 98, and it was sort of based on a adolescent relationship, really, of power structure, and also on the fact that he was much fatter than I was. But now that power structure is reversed, and it's very difficult to know how to do the double act now, because it's two overweight middle-aged men, and there's there's nothing funny about that. One of them has to be different to the other one. That's how double acts work. It doesn't really work now.
Just a couple of emails and texts to end on. This is Ian in Wandsworth. Can you let Stewart know that his last mailing list mail out was astounding? The never-ending list of bad reviews was hilarious.
Thank you very much.
Richard on the M6, can you pass on my praise and appreciation to Stewart Lee for his particular brand of comedy? And Ian in Bournemouth says, Dear Richard, I would ask you to tell Mr. Lee that he is the best stand-up comedian in the country, but as criticism of his work makes him better and better, I'd be worried this news might ruin him forever.
Oh, great. So, that's nice that they're keeping me on my toes. Good.
Just finally, let's just mention, so Stewart Lee's comedy vehicle is tonight, BBC Two at 11:20 p.m.
Oh, and if you've got a red button, there's a bit afterwards where I introduce people that I like, and it's Paul Sinner tonight, who's really good.
Oh, he's great, Paul Sinner, he came on the programme recently, so that's tonight, 11:20, and then the Austerity Binge. If people want to see you live doing all of the 3 hours from Stewart Lee's comedy vehicle.
Yeah, and there's the 1981 show as well with Alexi Sale.
So the South Bank Centre in London, Austerity Binge. What are the dates and what website?
Well, you can go to the South Bank website. The 27th is me. On the 28th, I'm in a performance of John Cage, works of John Cage, that I'm doing the spoken word bit on. Then the 1981 shows on the 29th, and then there's a lot of music shows on the 30th and the 28th as well.
Great. Britain's best stand-up comedian, Stewart Lee. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's